Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing both the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine and the war between Israel and Hamas. And today, we're going to start with the fighting that is taking place inside of Ukraine. So, as we know, the Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia offensive has essentially failed. Is there still fighting going on south of Orikhiv and other locales in Zaporizhzhia? Yes. But we are not seeing the same type of large-scale maneuver operations that the Ukrainians were employing earlier in the summer. Now, what we're starting to see the Ukrainians do is attack the eastern bank, or the left bank, as it is called, of the Dnieper River. If you watch certain mainstream media news outlets, they are claiming the Ukrainians have gained a quote-unquote foothold on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. Now, what does that look like? And how did the Ukrainians achieve this so-called foothold on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? This is the area in question. The area in gray is considered an active combat zone. The area in green, according to this mapping service, alleges that the Ukrainians control this area. So what do the Ukrainians control on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? Well, they control small buildings, small individual single-family homes, and marshland. They have not been able to move heavy armored infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, and more importantly, the logistical support that would be needed to continue further operations into Kherson. The reason the Ukrainians have established a presence, and I don't want to call it a foothold, I want to call it a presence on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, is because the Russians have not deployed forces in this area. So why have the Russians limited the size and scope of forces that could possibly prevent this Ukrainian presence on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? Well, it's simple. Logistically, there are very few roads that are in this swampy area. So you can see here, there's one road that leads from Oleshki to the actual Dnieper River proper. Ukrainian observation posts on the western bank of the Dnieper River, compounded with United States sensors, satellites, human intelligence, real-time intelligence, have the ability to target Russian forces if they were positioned very close to the Dnieper River. So the Russians have fallen back in areas near Oleshki and areas where they can actually maneuver. Again, this area, very swampy, very challenging for military units to move in and move out and supply forces in this area because of the marshland, the flooded marshlands that are in this area. Now, eventually some of this will freeze, but not enough to change what is happening on the ground. So the Russians see this barrier, this marshland, as the same defensive barrier as what you would see along the Dnieper River. But the Russians have the ability to maneuver and operate in these non-marshy, sandy areas. Furthermore, again, the Ukrainians have not broken through these marshlands. They have not crossed many of these rivers that separate the Dnieper River from the city and town of Oleshki. And the Russians are aware as well that the Ukrainians are challenged in terms of moving heavy equipment and logistical support to create conditions for a Ukrainian push towards Oleshki. And that's kind of where we sit. Is there a Ukrainian foothold? You could call it that. Is it any different from the Ukrainians being in Kherson versus sitting on the bank, the eastern bank of the Dnieper River? Not really. Because again, the ability for Ukrainian forces to push out of this swampland is negated by their inability to establish supply networks and move additional forces, heavy forces, maneuver forces with vehicles that the Russians would be able to spot right away and then engage and destroy with its heavy artillery systems, multiple launch rocket systems, and what have you. So again, yes, the Ukrainians have established a presence. Again, I would not call it a foothold. And it does not appear the Ukrainians are positioned for further offensive operations to take control of Oleshki. Again, this appears to be a narrative that is being created to take tension away from the defeat that occurred in Zaporizhia. But we'll continue to monitor what's happening here on the ground. And obviously we are continuing to see very heavy fighting taking place near Avdiivka. The Russians have gained more ground to the north by northwest of Avdiivka. If we go back here and we look at this time lapse, and you can see here what the Russians have taken over the last 24 hours. We believe actually the Russians have taken more territory, but again, this mapping system, the deep state mapping system, is provided by Ukrainian sources. And again, it's relatively accurate in terms of the movement and the eventual taking of territory by either side at a certain point. Now, I want to right now have a look at what is happening with the war in the Promised Land, the fighting that is taking place in and around Gaza City. The Israeli military has sealed off Gaza City. They have broken through to the Mediterranean Sea. They have effectively surrounded Gaza City, the old city, and other areas such as the Jabalia refugee camp and the smaller conjoined cities that are near Gaza as well. So very difficult for Hamas fighters to leave if they were caught in the old city. Obviously, there are many tunnels, many underground bunkers that the Hamas group has created in Gaza City. Now, the Israelis are being incredibly methodical in how they approach this urban fortress that Hamas has created. Now, I want to go back to 2017. I want to go back to the battle for Mosul. So the United States, Israel, Western nation states learned a great deal from what happened in Mosul. Mosul was controlled by ISIS, anywhere from 10 to 30,000 fighters. It was fortified. At the end of the day, the Iraqi military, the Kurdish military supported directly by U.S. assets, were able to defeat ISIS in Mosul. But a lot was learned in this very heavily built up urban area, in the wars and battles that took place, especially with the use of drones and robots. Now, it's been a while since the Mosul War, the battle for Mosul, and as I've said before, the Israelis learned a great deal. The Israelis have been preparing for this conflict. Now, a oftentimes underreported asset in which the Israelis are using. I'm going to show it to you. Do the Israelis have a Terminator? A Terminator killer robot? Yes, they do. It doesn't look like this, but in fact, the Israelis are deploying a vast array of killer robotic systems as they pursue Hamas fighters into these underground warrens. And we're going to have a look at some of these systems that the Israelis are using as we speak. Again, a lot of this information in terms of Israeli capability is top secret, and the general public is not going to know about some of these assets. But what we're hearing at MFAN is that the Israelis are using AI-powered robots on a massive scale in this conflict, designed to go into some of these urban warrens, underground bunkers, and destroy Hamas fighters. We're going to look at some of these. So again, obviously not a Terminator robot. It is a wheeled vehicle. But again, nonetheless, it is a vehicle that has the ability to work in an autonomous manner with AI, meaning it can identify a Hamas fighter from an Israeli fighter and then engage that target. Quadcopters. Obviously, we're seeing quadcopters being used in Ukraine, civilian-type quadcopter drones. We have seen them used in Mosul, both by the Iraqis and by ISIS. The Israelis have gone further and created a dedicated military quadcopter system that has the ability in a kamikaze manner to engage and destroy targets inside of buildings. And then finally, there's the things that we are not seeing. Things that the press operating in the Gaza combat zone will not report, cannot report. And again, we believe the Israelis are using systems similar to what you're seeing right here in ongoing combat operations against Hamas. So very interesting to see what the Israelis are using. At some point, I would imagine that it will become public knowledge as the fighting continues. But again, as we reported before, the Israelis are being very methodical, employing new technologies to go after Hamas fighters in Gaza City. And we will continue to watch this very, very closely. We expect this to last months, not weeks, months. But at the end of the day, we believe that Israel will completely destroy Hamas in the Gaza Strip, both in the northern strip and in the southern strip, as we continue to watch this war continue. That does it for today. Thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.